Did Iran fund the ANC? This investigation revealed a shocking flaw when it comes to South African political party funding, and it needs to be addressed. Since the ANC decided to file the ICJ case against Israel, a lot of rumors have been swirling around about the ANC allegedly accepting funding from Iran in exchange for this kind of a favor, as well as its foreign policy agenda. Given these rumors, I decided to do my own investigation into the matter and see whether or not there was any evidence to suggest that funding had indeed exchanged hands. And unfortunately, to my surprise, even with all these accusations and even with many ANC defenders denying them, there just wasn't any proper report that covered this issue. And so I decided to conduct my own. But before we get into the report and its shocking findings, could I please remind you to subscribe to the channel? It's entirely free, and all you have to do is click on the subscribe button below the video. Now, let's get started with this investigation. So the report that I published has been published as an article on X, and I've made sure to include the link in the description box below and pinned it to the comment section. So please make sure to click on the link, go check out my investigation, and also make sure to like it and share it and repost it on X, because it's really important that we get the final message across to as many people as possible. Now, for those of you who may not have X, please don't worry. You can actually still read the article without having an X account. So either way, make sure to check it out, click on the link below and read the full report. I guarantee it will be worth your while. So I'm not going to go through the entire thing in this video, but rather just the key important points so that you understand the crux of the matter and how important this is. So let's get started with the report. You'll notice that I explained how in order for us to determine whether or not the ANC did receive Iranian funding, well, obviously we need access to the ANC's financials, right? And that would specifically be for the period of the 2022-2023 financial year, as well as the 2023-2024 financial year, so that we can actually see how the financial position of the organization changed before and after the case was actually filed. So something that's really important for us to consider before we start is that political parties in South Africa don't actually need to make their financial statements public. This obviously sounds pretty dodgy in and of itself, because most public companies have integrated reports that you can find online, and that provides all the financial statements. But anyway, when we look at the public funding of a political party, it's important to note that some of the public funding comes from the state. So we have the Represented Political Party Fund and the Multi-Party Democracy Fund. In short, these are allocations that are made from the state to political parties. Some of them are distributed equally to all parties, regardless of how big they are, and others are proportional. And so this is according to the seats that the party has in provincial and national legislatures, and so the ANC will typically receive the largest share. Moving on, you can also receive private funding through donations, and this can actually be quite a problematic situation, because at the time of this analysis, all parties had to disclose all donations received above 100,000 Rand to the Electoral Commission each quarter. Now, this has actually been raised to 200,000 Rand in the last year, and this can be very problematic, and I'll explain why a little bit later in the video. Those that are under the threshold don't have to be disclosed. There is a cap of 5 million Rand in foreign donations per party per financial year that has been placed on donations. And then parties are also capable of receiving loans. And then, of course, you've got internal party revenue, and that can be membership fees, party levies, whereby elected officials will actually pay a portion of their salary back to the party, and then investment arms, such as the ANC's Chancellor House. So on November 14, 2022, it was reported that the ANC was considering selling assets to cover a 500 million Rand debt, as reported by the Daily Maverick, and this is citing internal NEC sources of the party. And so this is a legitimate issue. Now, of course, we're going to have to take that 500 million Rand in debt and include it in our assessment. And as you can see, for the financial year of 2022-23, we have here the ANC statement of profit and loss as provided to the IEC. And the IEC actually shared this in its 2022-2023 annual financial report. Now, something that's really important for us to note is how if we look at the income and operating expenses of the party, we see that the party had a total revenue of 383 million rand, right? But immediately there's a problem here. You see, there's a row of other income for 28 million rand, and nobody knows what the source of that other income is. Could it be investments? Could it be management consulting services? Nobody knows, and nobody knows who pays it. And this is problematic in and of itself. We then can see how the membership fees and levies were 39 million. There was also 115 million in loans, and nobody knows the actual origins of those loans either. Nobody knows which banks provided them or which other financial service providers provided them either. There's then, of course, the situation whereby you have all of these declared private donations, and so those are private donations that exceeded the threshold where you can actually see who provided the donation and how much the value was. And then, of course, we see the donations below the threshold, which were only at around 283,000 Rand at the time. But here's something that's really important to note. So if we scroll further down, we see how the ANC statement of financial position, which shows the assets and liabilities provided in the IEC's report, makes no mention of the 500 million Rand in debt. It only speaks about trade and other payables of 620,000 Rand. And so this is a very big difference. Now, I decided to add the 500 million Rand that the IEC missed to this financial statement. And what you see is a very big difference. All of a sudden, we see how the current liabilities of the ANC, as you can see over here, are 500,620,000 Rand. Very big difference, right? Now, as we move into the next financial year, we see how the income of the ANC changed substantially. Do you remember how there was that other income column? Well, all of a sudden, we've got an other income of 413 million Rand. Consider, if we scroll up, that the previous other income was just 28 million Rand. Now, all of a sudden, it's skyrocketed to 413 million Rand. Where did this money come from? And who provided it? And on what date was it provided? These are all questions that the IEC, the Independent Electoral Commission, has refused to get the ANC to answer. Furthermore, we see how, again, we have loans of 9 million Rand. We don't know who these loans come from. And of course, you have declared private donations of 57 million Rand, so at least there is transparency there. But then again, 11 million Rand in undeclared private donations. And who on earth could be providing this money? Let's move on and take a look at the ANC statement of financial position for the period. Well, again, no mention of the debt or any efforts to clear that debt up, and somehow they still say that there's current liabilities of just 565,000 Rand. Now, you might be wondering, well, why haven't I included the 500 million Rand in this year's statements of financial position? And here's the reason. So, in December 2023, ANC national spokesperson Hlengiwe Motsiribengu claimed that the party had stabilized its finances. This claim was supported by Treasurer General Gwen Ramokgopa on January the 8th, 2024, suggesting that the party's outstanding debt may have been paid off. Now remember, in December, the IEC case was filed, and it's that same December that the ANC said, oh, we don't have our debt anymore, it's been completely cleared up. And so although we don't have any concrete evidence to say who provided the ANC with money and how they earned it, the timing is quite suspicious, to say the least. And so I explained in my findings that in the 2023-24 financial year, the party's revenue was 826 million Rand, and this is according to the financial information made available by the IEC. With a surplus of 537 million rand minus expenses, of course, this means that I took the income for the period and the expenses and subtracted those. It is possible that the ANC may have paid off its sum. However, of the 826 million rand income, 413 million stems from what it classified as other income, the origins of which have not been disclosed. And let's also remember that there were loans which were taken out. We don't know the origins of those. And the payments below the threshold, we also don't know the origins of those. The main issue that needs to be addressed is the origins of the 413 million, as I explained. And then it also explains a little bit further down here that due to the Political Funding Act 6 of 2018, political parties in South Africa were required to disclose only donations to a value of 100,000 rand or more, as was the case in the 2022-23 and 2023-24 financial years. Since the enactment of the Electoral Matters Amendment Act 14 of 2024, however, this threshold has been raised to 200,000 rand, further limiting transparency. Now, again, remember how I said that this is a problem? Well, now I'm going to explain why. So let's pretend that hypothetically there is a criminal syndicate that wants political influence. Well, if you only have to declare donations above 200,000 rand and including 200,000 rand, well, that entity could say we can donate up to 199,999 rand and 99 cents to the party of our choice. And that is every quarter. Now, of course, that sum can come to nearly 800,000 rand, which will be undetected by the IEC or anyone else. But there's another problem. Remember how there have been notorious gangsters such as Pablo Escobar, who had huge crime syndicates. Now, of course, people like him weren't open about who they actually were. They had multiple business fronts through which they moved money. And so there could be somebody in South Africa who, let's say, has a restaurant, another business which is a movie theater, another business which is a laundry place, and so on. And so what is to stop those people from making donations through separate business entities that fall below the threshold? Well, they could funnel potentially millions of rands to a political party completely undetected. And so ultimately, what the Political Funding Act and the Electoral Matters Amendment Act do is protect political parties and limit the exposure that they have to the public. And this really works against the public's best interests. Wouldn't you want to know whether or not there are criminals and foreigners who may have influence over your political party and their agenda? This is something that I would think that any concerned voter would want to be made aware of. And yet, the law of the country and the IEC is keeping voters in the dark. As you can see, I have this recommendation section in which I explain what needs to be done in order to provide the much needed transparency to South African political funding. And my first recommendation is that the two aforementioned acts be repealed. All donations should be disclosed to the IEC and subsequently made public, no matter the amount. There is no reason, which is to the benefit of the South African public, that any donation should remain undisclosed. The second recommendation is for the IEC to demand that all political parties disclose all other funding sources when submitting their financial statements to the IEC. Had this policy been in place, the questions surrounding whether or not Iran may have provided funding to the ANC would also not have arisen. For all we know, the ANC could be innocent and that all that money came from investments through Chancellor House. But we also don't know if perhaps all that money came from Iran. The bottom line is that this lack of transparency has led to this critical issue taking center stage. Thirdly, there is no circumstance in which foreign funding of political parties should be permitted. Under Chapter 3, Section 8, 4A, and Section 8, 4B of the Political Funding Act 6 of 2018, political parties are permitted to accept donations from foreign entities for the purpose of training or skills development and policy development, respectively. These provisions open the doorway to foreign influence on South African political parties and their policy directions, which infringes on the protection of South African political activities and governance from foreign influence. I'd also like to make mention of the fact that, yes, some people might be able to provide funding under the guise of training or skills development or policy development. But let's be very clear. There are easy loopholes around this. Say, for example, there's a foreign currency who decides to fund a political party. And they say, well, don't worry, we're not going to provide you a donation as declared to the IEC, but we're rather going to provide you a donation for skills training. Well, it's quite simple. They can say, we're going to give you 5 million rand, as is the maximum value, and all you have to do is take 5 million rand from your training fund and put it towards your election campaign, and we are going to simply reimburse you by putting another 5 million rand in your training fund to replace that money. This is a pretty poorly engineered law, which really needs revision because ultimately it's very easy to get around. The fourth issue is that the IEC must ensure greater accuracy and transparency when it comes to the disclosure of financial statements from political parties. While donations stemming from the RPPF and MPDF are included as income in the political party's financial statements, there is no mention made of the sums earned from private donations, both disclosed and undisclosed, as well as loans and other income. So if you take a look at the IEC's annual reports, which are included in the footnotes of this investigation, you'll see how political party financial statements are provided. But in the income section for each of the political parties, the only sources of income that are mentioned are these specific funds, so the RPPF and MPDF, coming from the IEC, as well as interest that is earned for the period. No private or public donations are mentioned, no loans are mentioned, none of the other income as it is categorized is mentioned. And so the IEC is not providing fully accurate financial statements in its annual reports. Ultimately, this is a massive issue for South Africa. If we do not know who is funding political parties, how are we able to tell whether or not there is foreign influence in the election and, even more importantly, criminal influence in elections? This is an issue that needs to be put to the IEC and needs to be urgently resolved, specifically ahead of further elections in South Africa. And for that reason, I have a call to action for anybody who is watching this video. Please make sure to read this full investigation, like it, share it with your family and friends and anybody who may be interested, and repost it, because ultimately the only way that we are going to be able to get the ball rolling on any action is by creating awareness of the issue, because far too many people don't realize what's happening right under their noses. Thank you very much for tuning into this video. If you found it informative, please remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and consider supporting the channel and enjoying some additional perks by becoming a Power Club member. You can do so by clicking the join button below. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.